Hi there. Starting the second part of our presentation of the Module 3, still on in-depth voluntary carbon markets, and I'll be starting now the part regarding the income streams for land managers. This part of the presentation and the training has been drafted based on the idea of showcasing the streams and benefits that land managers can have when applying to the VCM, the voluntary carbon markets. Why should they do? Why should they apply for? And then we have here a comparison of two different systems, a till system regarding the soil management on the right-hand side and a no-till system on the left-hand side. One of them we call it regenerative. It's the right-hand side that, if you can see, emits a lot of carbon dioxide and water vapor, okay, which are two of the main greenhouse gases. Remember, we have more than 90 different greenhouse gases. The two mains are CO2 and water vapor. But on the left-hand side, I have a totally opposite scenario, and it's totally opposite. When I have a no-till system, I actually sequester carbon dioxide instead of emitting, and I actually drain water vapor into water and retain on my biomass, both of the plant and to the soil microbiological biomass, okay? This is a very interesting to see, there are different ways of making agriculture happen, and people can choose which way to take. One of the examples of how land managers, cooperatives, they can have a new stream of income. Farmers and cooperatives earn revenue from verified credits. This is one of the examples. If you gather with other colleagues under a cooperative and you define or opt to design and implement a project, you can actually not just improve your production by producing more per amount of resource used, but you can actually create verified credits, which will give you more financial assets. So with those assets, you can choose to improve your activities and so on. So this shows a new stream income for farmers, okay? The other point that actually benefit land managers, landowners, cooperatives, farmers union, etc., is that the voluntary carbon markets, when it produces verified carbon credits, it rewards sustainable management, okay? You do sustainable land management for improvement of your production, for improvement of your marketing, of your image, but at the end of the day, you're actually managing your land more sustainably. And this is not what we call the rocket science. Sometimes just the way you manage the grasses, like the grazing management, the way we're thinking simple things, okay? Second, agroforestry is something that's coming more into mind now, more into fashion. It's the fact that we can combine fruits with crops, with grasses, with animals, and etc. by producing a multi-story production system that benefits not just the nature, but the soil and the animals that are there. So agroforestry is one of the innovations that is not that new, but it's some innovation because it's coming more into mind now, and something that's worth reading through and understanding more. Countries like Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Australia, they're doing very well on agroforestry in more tropical ones. Some countries, they do very well, like France, Italy, on the more temperate. And agroforestry is a trend, is a tendency that I personally hope that it just takes off and goes. And regarding the reward on sustainable management, soil enhancement or improvement is something very important. If you remember that the soil is the base of any system, anything you do must improve your soil conditions or protect your soil, okay? Access regarding the benefits still to the farmers and the land managers or project managers, access to green finance. On the right-hand side, we have precedence public research, okay, The link to this research is on the written material. You can have access and explore. This is a figure that the Precedence research has done, a study on the voluntary carbon credit trading market size. How are you going to be behaving from this year? It's a very new data, 2025 to 2034, so 10 years. And you can see the curve of growth of a credit trading market size. The trends and the tendencies just grow because the population, the societies, they starting to understand that the agriculture can be one amazing way of having a healthy life by subsidizing, by supporting good agriculture, sustainable agriculture practices. Society benefits with a better diet. The soil benefits with a more stable environment that will actually contribute with a carbon sequestration that in turn will benefit the entire society. Is a positive cycle, okay? And that's why the projections are all to grow, okay? Getting back to the left-hand side of the presentation, carbon projects open access to green and sustainably linked loans. What does that mean? If you're looking at having a bank loan to improve your farm activity, just getting back to the left-hand side of the presentation, carbon projects open access to green and sustainably linked loans. If you or your company is looking at having actually a loan on a finance, getting back to our presentation regarding the access to green finance, carbon projects, they open access to green and sustainably linked loans. If you are part of a company or a given company is looking at having some facilities or maybe a better way to access what we call the green loans or sustainability linked loans, whenever this given company shows that they have or it has a voluntary carbon certification, it will demonstrate that the company has already applied some very high level procedures that guarantees the sustainability. So it helps building up the sustainability memory of a company. They actually open their access to green financing or sustainability open finance, which has a different example, different interest rates, has some advantages and etc. Nowadays on the market, there are very, very interesting what we call the green financing mechanisms that for you to participate or to access this, you must show that you have a sustainability certification. And the voluntary carbon markets are one of those very accurate and high level certifications, okay? The green finance used as collateral for regenerative transition programs. If you're looking at improving the situation of your farm example, one of the ways is a regenerative ways. When you are part of the voluntary carbon market, you actually qualified to do so, okay? It's one collateral for regenerative transition. It's one of the ways to do the regenerative transition or sustainability transition, okay? Other advantages is that is a de-risk investment and attract impact finance. The voluntary carbon market can be something that a business itself apply its revenues under something that's safer, something that's trustable, and that's why we call it de-risking investment. You invest in something that's actually very strong and stable, okay? And at the same time, it attracts impact finance, a type of the finance that looks beyond the profit. It goes profit with sustainability, okay? Market recognition and competitive advantage. Whenever a business or a corporation, they looking at, oh, pardon, they are looking at market recognition and competitive advantage. It's all about the advantages that the business will be reaping, will be collecting, will be harvesting whenever they decide to go to the voluntary carbon markets. It's a market recognition, meaning that a business itself, a business that decides to go beyond its own commitments and go to a more sustainable, more accurate way of defining sustainability and showcasing sustainability to society can be done through VCM, voluntary carbon markets. And whenever businesses, they decide to do that on a voluntary basis, they have a market recognition and they have some advantages regarding competitiveness, okay? When compared to the other companies don't do the same. And just some thoughts here that remembering, just reminding you that all this knowledge here, more in depth with the right references and citations, it's all on the written material, okay? Participation enhances reputation and market positioning. It's well known. The customers, the clients, the society, they tend to go to consume products that has better reputation regarding the environmental footprint and regarding low carbon emissions, okay? Projects demonstrate transparency and commitments. So whenever your company that it's producing the VCUs, voluntary carbon units, they participate on a grant. For example, you're participating, asking for a grant from a government or maybe from some fund, and you demonstrate that you have a certification, you can actually have this advantage in many aspects. And one of the aspects is that transparency. Remember, I have mentioned before, transparency is one of the main pillars of the voluntary carbon market, because everything you do must be transparent, accessible, and when it's transparent and accessible, it brings more trust, a feeling of trust. And it helps you as a company or a company that you represent to be the way better position on the market, or maybe when you are competing for a grant, like I said before, okay? Another thing regarding the premium prices. You have the price for something, but for the same objective, for the same feature, same object, you have another object that has a better or a lesser carbon footprint that is certified by the VCM, one of the examples. This product here, which is certified, surely will have a pathway to have a premium price, okay? That's why I have put here. Regenerative and carbon neutral brands command premium prices. That's the difference. You see the difference between, example, a car, a fully electric car and a combustion car. There are difference of prices because one demonstrates more sustainability on the fabrication, etc., another less. Doesn't mean that's bad, but less. Same happen with the food. You have a different market price, example, for organic certified products than the conventional products. Same happens with the big commodities, such as soybean and such as corn. The prices are very different from a conventional or a GMO corn or conventional or GMO soy in comparison to organically certified soy or corn, okay? And the difference of the prices, it's called a premium prices. When you have a certification, you have a premium price, have something that distinguishes you than the others. And the VCM, the voluntary carbon market, is one of the ways of having it, okay? On the right-hand side, you can see the voluntary carbon credit market, the forecasts again for 9 months, and you see the segment statistics on the very right-hand side. The forest and land use segment reached last year 49% of all the segment statistics. Okay? And CGS industry segment, the C agronomy, agriculture, tends to grow up to 30.5%. Okay? This is a very interesting to see because you're going to be starting to recognize that the agriculture sector, the agricultural land management, they have the biggest delta, meaning that they have the biggest capacity of improving both production and fixing carbon. The industry itself, the energy industry example, has a limitation, very predictable, okay? The agriculture has a lot to improve, specifically on developing countries that still adopt technologies that are not very environmental friendly, okay? Let's go to the next. Regarding VCM, strategic partnership and net zero collaboration. I'll start with the right-hand side figure. You're going to you see that on the amount of voluntary carbon credit market, the share of the carbon credit, you see that private companies take the biggest slice of the market. You see the amount is the darker purple here. You see the amount. It's more, it's probably 60-something% here. When you take a quick look at private companies under the voluntary carbon market, you say, look, this is a voluntary. This is not a compliance market. But even though private companies are investing on that, because they have understood that by partnering with other company or by partnering with some project developer, they can actually help the world achieving the sustainable development goals. They can collaborate with what we call the net zero emission. They can improve the marketing and sustainability communication of their own businesses. And at the end of the day, they noticed that they can contribute with something higher and bigger than just profit. As you see, more than 60% are led by private companies. And then you have the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations. They do a lot on the voluntary carbon credit market. Then we have the government and individuals. Those individuals here can be maybe a foundation, can be some group of professionals, etc. Okay? You see how important the VCM is turning. You see private companies investing from their own pocket, meaning that they see offer and demand, and they see cost effectiveness on investing it. Okay? This is a very good prognostic for the future, and there's a huge market for you as a professional to invest in the future as a carbon developer, maybe as an employee of a company. So carbon markets apply to ALM, agricultural land management, something very, very important. Okay? Just getting back to the presentation, companies pursue partnerships for very verified high integrity credits. That's why it's important whenever you draft a project for a company, for a private company, it must adopt the right methodology that consequently will be will be producing highly integrity credits and verified ones, okay? So you see here how things are connected. Companies investing high on methodologies that are very highly integrated, okay? Very important. Secondly, long-term collaboration support insetting and rural development. Remembering what is insetting? Insetting is an expression that we normally use for a business, a company itself, to neutralize within their own chain of custody, own chain of production, okay? Example, I have 100 tractors on my company. It's a big company. I use diesel. By using diesel, I emit this amount of diesel. How can I decrease that? So I change my tractors by a tractor that can use a biodiesel that will be actually emits the way less carbon. Or maybe some of the tractors I can have electric and then are neutralized. This is in insetting, whenever I work inside my chain of production, okay? And there is an assumption here, very interesting, and I'm going to be reading again. Long-term collaboration, so companies and different agents like the governments, NGOs and companies, academia, universities, etc., working together, collaboration, support insetting and rural development. Rural development is something very important because it goes beyond agriculture production, beyond economy. It goes social governance, environmental integrity, cultural things. So this assumption here is very important, because we start to understand that VCM, the voluntary carbon markets, when well applicable on the right way, can actually contribute with the development of rural areas. And this is very important in a world that's losing people, the exodus from rural areas to urban areas. So this is a very important. Rural development in developing countries is one thing. Rural development in poor countries, such as countries in Africa, in Latin America, and Southeast Asia, is something very important. So meaning that the voluntary carbon markets can contribute with the development of communities, both developing and undeveloped, and it can be one of the pathways toward the real and responsible sustainability. Okay? Just going to the next slide. Carbon credits can be understood as a financial assets. Credits form a new asset class in sustainable finance. Whenever your company, this is a very interesting assertion, because it's becoming a trend in some areas. A company invests in carbon projects. They have a percentage of the carbon credits generated at the end of the first validation, and they retain those credits. They don't put on the market. And it's becoming one of the asset class of sustainable finance. Okay? This is one way. The other way is businesses. Example, a financing institution, instead of just lending money, just putting money on the market, they say, look, I'll put this money on the market and you can access if you apply regenerative agricultural practices for deforestation, illegal deforestation decrease at the Amazon forest. You see the attachments? You're going to be attaching deforestation free with the regenerative agriculture. So someone who comes to you to get your money will have to do those two. So it's becoming a new class of assets. Okay? It's interesting because it's driving sustainable financing. Okay? High quality credits, we know that the biggest players, Vera, Gold Standard, ICVCM, they offer liquidity. If you ask me, why, teacher, why a lot of people always talking about Gold Standard and Vera, Gold Standard and Vera? Because I tell you why, because they have a liquidity. They have a very high level of integrity, very high level of clear procedures, and they are by having clear procedures, they have a good insertion in society, they have a recognition of society and businesses, they have liquidity. Meaning that the credits you generate under such a methodology will be quicker sold. That's why it's important, okay? Third bullet point, corporations integrate carbon portfolios into their environmental, social, and governance investment strategies, anticipating rising demand and appreciating values as global carbon prices increase. You see, that's a movement of corporations, companies, integrating those carbon credits, those carbon portfolios, also carbon credits, carbon projects, because they are projecting and appreciating the values of carbon credit on the market. Okay? It's always following the cost of opportunity and the offer and demand reason. How much I have on the market will define how many credits I have in the market, how it's available, that will define the price of it. Scarcity defines the price. And companies are actually investing on that, forcing the appreciation. Appreciation means adding value on it, okay? Because they understand the global carbon market, the global carbon prices will increase, okay? It's becoming a green currency, okay? It's very interesting because if you can use it for good purpose, we are on the right track. Main buyers and sales channels is good for you to understand. Carbon credits are sold via direct offtake, aggregators, exchanges, and cooperatives. You see the channel, I have created this column here. You see the channel on the left-hand side, those four that I have mentioned. And then you have a different classifications: liquidity, scale, transparency, and typical users, okay? For the direct offtake, low liquidity, but they have a large scale because they are producing it. They have a high transparency because they are responsible to produce it. And typical users are corporations, okay? The aggregators, they have a medium liquidity The scale is medium to high, the transparency moderate, and the typical users are different ones, are developers and smallholders. Okay? When we say typical users, are the corporations, the organizations that make those, submit and develop those products. Okay? The exchanges, liquidity is very high, scale is global, because remember, on the main buyers and sales channel, the exchange happens on the very high level. Remember the Article 6.2 and 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. It allows for you to create a carbon credit that will be used amongst nations, not just on your country or on your community. It can be negotiated amongst nations. That's why exchanges that happen, they're high liquidity and they have a global scale, a high transparency, and the typical users are investors and traders. Okay, different level of spheres of negotiation. And then we have the cooperatives. Medium liquidity, the scale tends to be local or regional. Cooperatives, not operating local or regional. Transparency is moderate, and normally the typical users are producers and communities. The example I have used for you with olive oil is exactly the cooperative. Okay? Just before I wrap up this part, each channel varies by liquidity, scale, and transparency, okay? Because the final product will attend different demands. That's why. Still on main buyers and sales channels, the aggregators and brokers, who are they? Brokers are intermediaries facilitating carbon credit transactions between buyers and project developers. Remember, you are the manager of a cooperative of olive oil, okay? You are the project developer. But you need someone who will be buying from you. You don't have the skills to sell directly. The brokers and the aggregators will help you, okay? And there is the definition of end buyers. Entities such as individuals or corporations look to offset their carbon emissions through purchasing carbon credits. The buyers, they buy from your brokers, okay? The aggregators, they act as intermediaries, connecting small projects to large buyers, and they perform due diligence, always, because before you sell something, you need some due diligence. You gotta check if you're on the right track, the thing that you're selling actually existed, is on the right way. They do the portfolio curation meaning that they will advertising and making sure that everything is accurate and it's following strict orders, strict procedures, and it's actually real. And liquidity enhancement. They help putting the credit on the market, improving and enhancing liquidity, okay? Because they are well connected to sales and buyers channels, and they know how to deal, okay? The main buyers is still main buyers and sales channel, the project developers and cooperative. This graphic, this scheme is very interesting because it explains the carbon project developers playing a central role in the voluntary carbon market. And you can see as a central point here, the carbon developers. How? And if you see the arrows just going in and out, okay? Example, project developers, standards, they always follow, that's why they receive the arrow, they always follow the verification and validation bodies, okay? They must accomplish what it has to be accomplished, following up strict procedures, okay? Then normally they receive the capital from providers, from investment funders to develop the project. And then the project developers can follow one of the way. They can issue, after validating, after verifying, validating, they can issue the credits and create the credits, okay? Or after producing the carbon, the VCUs, they can go to the traders that will be selling to the buyers. Or project developers can do the other way. As you can see, there are arrow going around on the right-hand side. They can sell the credits direct to the end buyers. You don't get to see many times that because you need someone with trading or broking or retailing specific skills. But some project developers, they do the right way. They produce the credits and sell direct to the end buyers. But normally, not normally, but tends to be through traders, brokers, and retailers, okay? And once those end buyers, they get those credits, they can do the offsetting, okay? They offset the climate contributions, okay? Via transaction and etc. These are two ways, okay? If you do the project developers directly, you create a credit and the credit goes to a transaction and creates an offset slash climate solution, climate contributions. Remember the NDC, the National Declared Contributions? It goes exactly there to say, this state, which belongs to this nation, or this province belongs to this nation, this country, has emitted X credits. This amount of carbon credits or removed or reduced carbon emissions will go direct to the NDC, the National Declared Contribution, okay? Goes exactly there, so will be decrease the amount of removals or reductions that the country must accomplish by the year X. And it must be done, like I explained before, very clearly and transparent to avoid double counting. So the credits produced here by this figure must be counted one. That's why they follow rigor and one very serial code that will be registering. So the country, by the NDCs defined by the Paris Agreement, will be comprised of credits generated by cooperatives, generated by associations, by companies, etc., which are project developers. They will be contributing by the national NDC, okay? Enable this arrangement, enable smallholder farmers or family farmers to participate through revenue sharing models, okay? Example, I'm a part of a family farming association, me and another 15 colleagues, and I want to be part of this project. How do I participate? I implement the project and get some revenue sharing. One model of getting recognizes a revenue sharing. Example, we create 3 credits average per hectare, and this gives me 3 tons, equivalent to 3 credits per hectare. I have 10 hectares, equivalent to 30 credits. A percentage of those credits go to the carbon developer, a percentage go to me. That's why we say these models enable smallholders to participate through revenue sharing models. There are other things, other ways of participating, such as the own association of producers become a project developers. They contract someone and they can benefit 100% from that. Or they can be part of a bigger project. They receive a certain amount of credits. That's all arrangeable, okay? Limitations, I get to a point to share with you some of the limitations. Everything in the world has its own advantages and limitations. The voluntary carbon market is not different. And I want to share with you some of very interesting ones. Despite growth, voluntary carbon markets face structural and ethical challenges. Some methodological inconsistencies. If you remember, I have mentioned Verra, carbon registry, gold standard, etc. They have their own methodology that we must follow, but within the methodologies, you gotta follow some strict example, sub-methodology for carbon collection. Some companies, they use the methodology A, some verifiers, they use methodology A, verifiers methodology B, or the methodology C. So there is no very consistent, depending on the methodology, they are not very consistent. They have some level of inconsistency. One example is the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change. They do adopt some, what we call the factors of emission and some methodologies that are not very representative of some countries, such as the countries located on the tropics. Okay? That's why we mention as one of the challenges, the methodological inconsistency. The prediction and the trend in the near future is that we allow, and the new tools of methodologies will be allowing you as a carbon developer to use your local methodology. If you have a local methodology, peer-reviewed and published on strong journals of science, you can use such a methodology for your project. But it must be peer-reviewed, internationally recognized, and technically viable, okay? I heard, and I've been reading that the Verra methodology called the VM0042, the version 2.2, which is the last version, or version 3, I'm not sure, 2.2 or 3, they allowed you to use domestic science. And as long as it's published and peer-reviewed, you can use. This opened up a huge advantage for us to actually emulate, take this methodological inconsistency away. But nowadays, there is an inconsistency. Second, high transaction cost. Why? Remember that you have a project developers, you have brokers, you have the owners of the funds, you have the farmers, and then you have the governments that will be charging to make the transaction, etc. So we have many actors to make this ball rolling, to make this engine run. That's why, and this results in a high transaction cost. Okay. Third, pardon me, permanence uncertainty. Remember the example I used? No tillage system. I come to a farm and say, look, for us to sequester the carbon and keep the carbon on soil, we must practice no tillage agriculture, meaning that you, sir, won't be allowed to use your plowing anymore, because we need to keep this carbon on the ground so you can have the credits, in 3-5 years, and keep having credits every year or every second year, depending on methodology. How can I guarantee that that man or the person will not plow the soil? It's hard. That's why we call it permanence uncertainty. Okay. Fourth, and very important, greenwashing. You do 10 and advertise it 100. Greenwashing is something very important to see. You gotta go read the document and stands, check and see if it's true. And that's why the validation and the verification body goes to farm and check your monitoring plan against the activities you have set. You said you're going to be implementing, or you have implemented already, to avoid greenwashing, avoiding giving the credit, giving the label, giving the certification to someone that doesn't do what he says he did or says it's doing, to avoid greenwashing. Okay. Greenwashing, unfortunately, always exists on the area of sustainable agriculture and environmental at all, and it's part of the game. Okay, and the fifth point is the low inclusion of smallholders. You can understand smallholders as smallholder farmers or family farmers. I tell you why. On the next slide, I'm going to be explaining, but just giving you an idea. For you to implement a project, for a VCM project in a farm, on a group of farms, you need consultants for the first appraisal. You need consultants for soil collection. You need funds for soil analysis. You need funds for project draft. So you need a lot of funds. And this amount of funds can be impracticable for smallholder farmers. If they are too small, or if they are not organized, probably they will be out of the VCM. That's why recently Vera and other companies, they have allowed what they call grouped projects, meaning that instead of applying as a sole farm, a unique farm, one farm, you can get a group of farms on the same territory, neighboring farms, and come to a project developer or become a project developer, and work hard on that. By doing that, you split and you divide the costs, and makes easier, decrease the cost of transactions and make things easier. This is one of the ways. But nowadays, we don't get to see many smallholder farmers participating on the market because of the costs. Okay. Still, regarding the limitations, we have a few slides on limitations. We have some inconsistencies between standards. There's a different standard, like I said, gold standard, Vera, ACR, and CAR. They use a varied assumptions, and that's why at the second slide of this presentation, of the first part, I have mentioned methodology selection is very important, because by reading the methodologies, we understand which one is more applicable to you. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to be working hard, and by the middle of the way, you realize that the methodology you select is not good, because the assumptions are not applicable to your case. That's why it's important. Second, lack of harmonization complicates comparability. It's hard to compare. Example, if I have an integrated crop livestock systems compared to the grasslands management systems, it will be different. So we need some harmonization on that. We need some harmonization on data. Example, GIS data with soil use data. Sometimes I have a data at the regional level, but I don't have a data on the local level, and I need the data to local level. So this harmonization may complicate comparability, because I must compare my system with the system of my neighbor, and saying the importance of my project is because my project provides this. You only do that if you compare. And to do so, you need some more harmonization, more methodologies that will help you with standards that will help you to harmonize data. Okay? ICVCM's core carbon principles seek alignment. The ICVCM, as you remember, my second class, is an institution that helps keeping the integrity of the carbon projects. And the ICVCM needs some principles, needs aligned some principles. So once it's done, it's pretty new, and it's normal to any new technology, any new type of innovative thing, but it's part of the core principles to align it. Methodologies must be aligned to speak a common language, otherwise it will be very hard to compare.
Você que não conhece Elisa e Alice, tu chame de réplica, que pinta entrega tia fica alfa.
So regarding ICV CMS, the core carbon principles, it seek alignment. Remember, I have explained the principle of ICVCMs, and the intention is to keep integrity of a carbon project and carbon market, to speak a common and understandable language. There is a struggling now because as the carbon market is developing, new methodologies is coming, and we need a common ground so we can compare things and can have this very harmonized and convergent principles into one platform that guarantees integrity, okay? Still on regarding limitations on the voluntary carbon markets, as I mentioned before, when I spoke about the smallholders, is the high transaction cost. One example, certification costs can exceed from $150,000 to $300,000, because you have teams that will be doing the inventory of forestry, teams that will be doing the soil collection, teams that will be drafting the monitoring reports, the monitoring plan, etc. You have many different professional teams that will come, and this is very costly, okay? As I said before, it becomes a barrier for small producers who cannot afford those high transaction costs, and a solution can be a digital monitoring, reporting, verification, and modular approach to reduce costs. What's happening now? Companies such as Agrina, such as Perennial, such as other carbon developers, they are using what we call technology stack. They put in technology on top of technology so they can decrease the uncertainty and they can decrease the cost of doing the monitoring, the report, and verification. Okay, using artificial intelligence, so they can decrease the certification codes that normally exceeds this amount I have mentioned. And by doing so, they can afford can turn affordable even for smallholders, small producers, family farmers to apply for this. But technology will play an important role. If you want to think about something that must improve is that, the certification cost. If you want to just dive deep into that, you can Google artificial intelligence for MRV on voluntary carbon markets. I think it's a good advice for you to understand what's happening and how to make things easier. That might help you on your endeavor soon. I think that's a new tip to give to you guys, okay? Still regarding limitations, carbon permanence and reversal risk, land-based projects face risks from fires, droughts, and land use change. This is an interesting bullet point, because when you project a long-term monitoring plan and long-term implementation plan for your carbon project, you must have a chapter of risking. And during this chapter of risking, you have a subchapter of catastrophes, or maybe wildfires, like here, droughts and land use change. You always put a buffer. Example, I have produced 4 credits per hectare, but I'll be accounting for 3 credits. 1 credit, which represents 25% of the 4 credits, will be going to my uncertainty, because I have some uncertainty if the fires will hit my farm, or if I'm gonna be hit by droughts, or maybe some land use change. Someone get into my land and invade my land, they take part of my land grabbing, I must be protected, okay? So this is one of the problem of permanence and reversal risk, okay? Buffer pools mitigate risks, but may be insufficient. What I haven't mentioned, the uncertainty fund, we call it buffer pools. Like example, 25% of a credit buffer pools can play an important role, but may be insufficient. Example, if half of my farm I had a problem with the fires in 50% of my farm. The buffer won't be enough. And this is one of the problems of a verified carbon, the voluntary carbon markets. It's hard to guarantee that things will be as you want it to be. And this is a risk. Any activity has a risk. This is one of the risks. The third bullet point, insurance and stewardship agreements enhance permanence. Okay? This is a very important. You can have your project and pay an extra or decrease your gain by paying an insurance, but even if your farm sets on fire, you have an insurance that will guarantee that you keep your credits, okay? And this type of agreements with stewardship enhance permanence, because that tells the buyer of your credit that your credit has more stability because you have an insurance and you are adopting the right buffer pool, you are adopting the right practices that protects the credit, okay? Very important. Still, like I mentioned before, greenwashing and double counting as a limitation. The offsets misused without real emissions reduction cause greenwashing. This is very important. All the offsets that I'll be adopting and using must be used with a real emission reduction. If I say I have produced 100 credits, I must use it equivalent to 100 credits with a real emission reduction. Otherwise, I'll be pushing greenwashing to keep rolling, okay? Double counting occurs across systems. It's normal. To keep the integrity of credits, the carbon verifiers are doing their best to avoid double counting, avoiding that the credits created for one purpose is used to another purpose. Is double counting, counting more than one time. So systems are improving to that, but it's still occurring in different levels, but occurring. And VCMI claims code and Article 6 improve transparency. Remember the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement? It's comprised specifically by different paragraphs, but the paragraph 6.2 and 6.4 allows nations and state, multi-state, multi-actors to work together and having the option to implement project on a larger scale and benefit larger territories for that, okay? And the VCMI claims code helps a lot companies to produce the credits and use it for taxes, abatements, and etc. So these are something very interesting to avoid double counting and greenwashing, okay? Inclusion of smallholder communities. Smallholder lacks access due to complexity, costs, and literacy gaps. I have spoke about costs, but I'll be talking about those two: complexity. For you to become a carbon developer, to propose a carbon, you need experts. Example, greenhouse gas emission experts. You need the GIS experts, you need the soil experts, you need the agriculture experts, and etc. Normally, smallholders, they don't have access to those technicians. And this is mainly driven by literacy gaps. If you think about Europe, that's not normal, but if you think about Latin American, some African countries, and specifically Latin American and African countries, the literacy levels are low, meaning that the capacity of taking decisions are low as well. And this is one of the limitations of VCM. Okay? Capacity building and aggregation needed for fair participation. I totally agree, and that's why I have put it here. It is one of my main carriers, the main thing I defend. We must build the capacity, specifically on smallholders and communities, and aggregation of knowledge, aggregation of communities to work together is need for fair participation. We need to put people together so they can build up their own capacity, so they can apply and benefit from voluntary carbon markets. Because smallholder farmers and communities in developing countries, they are the ones, and indigenous communities as well, traditional communities, they are the ones that manage the forests in the world. They are the ones that manage the mangroves. They are the ones who are the stewards. They do the stewardship, they're the stewards for the natural environment. How could I ever think about keeping them out of this market? It's not. And it's one of the main ways of getting yourself into the project is working with those communities in developing countries. They are seeking it. They are looking for people prepared to work on that, okay? And that can be done as a project developer. That can be done you as a capacity builder. Example, teaching them on how to use a no-tillage correctly, or maybe producing their own fertilizers. This is a huge, is a myriad of opportunities for people out there. But remember, smallholders and traditional communities are always on the margin of the systems. And they're supposed to be on the center of this. That's why always when I talk about them, I get so, I get emotion, I get very excited. Okay. Pathways for strengthen integrity. The key actions, digital monitoring, reporting verification, and blockchain transparency. Remembering the blockchain is a type of a system that we work that has its cryptography, so meaning that's protected and very transparent. Okay. Secondly, alignment with the national inventories. Remember the NDCs I have mentioned? If a project is well connected inside, they can guarantee that the nation NDC is benefiting from it. It must be aligned so they will be contribute with the national greenhouse gas emissions inventories. Open access data. Data must be openly accessed from the day you submit your project to the people to access the data openly, and going beyond it, information on how to submit, how to draft the project must be open as well. Okay? Other thing, incentives for adaptive management. We call it adaptive management is a management specifically on agriculture, management that benefit the soil, benefit the farmer, benefit uses less resources to produce a more amount of food, a more amount of product. And these are all understood as adaptive management. And why we call it adaptive? Because currently we must adapt to the new frontiers of climate. Climate is changing. Patterns of rain are changing. Winds are changing. And that's why we call it, we must incentivize adaptive management. Okay? Now we get into the opportunities for agriculture sector. Agriculture can transform sustainability into measurable carbon benefits. As I said before, carbon has the potential to be the game changer, specifically in developing countries. Okay? Participation pathway, farmers benefit and broader impacts. They can benefit both from the generation of credits and for the improvement of production. Okay, it can go the way beyond what we call the broader impacts. They can even impact on the quality of air, the quality of the emissions of gases. Okay, opportunities for agriculture sector, and this is a sub-item called adoption of regenerative practices. As I mentioned before, practice such as no-tillage, cover crops, adaptive grazing, like holistic grazing management, rotative or rotatinous grazing management, the integration of the legumes into grazing, bringing diversity. These are all practices welcoming regarding regenerative agriculture, which will reflect on improvement of voluntary carbon markets by improving production and actually improving on the carbon production. It's well understood on the university and on academia that a well-managed soil, apart of contributing with improvement of production, actually acts as a stronger sinker to the carbon emission, carbon pool, okay? Carbon sequestration, pardon. And adoption of regenerative agriculture practices generate measurable emissions reduction and co-benefits. Remember, regenerative agriculture practices are not just for production improvement, are for soil health improvement, biodiversity improvement, water cycle, soil cycle, and etc. Partnerships with aggregators and developers. Aggregators manage monitoring, reporting, verification, certifications, and it's a benefit sharing, ensuring equitable revenue distribution. This is very interesting point here. If you want to see the development on the shellnut, on a nutshell, or something very important, the benefit sharing must be ensured. Otherwise, we want to be benefiting only the carbon developers and forgetting about the farmers. Or maybe we'll be forgetting about developers, about the farmers, just benefiting the ones, the buyers. And that's why the benefit sharing must be equitable and well distributed. Okay? Regarding the opportunities, institutional and governmental programs, farmers join soil carbon or transition programs. It's very interesting because the governments in different countries, they are leading programs focus on the soil carbon improvements or soil health improvements that will become a soil carbon in the near future, okay? I can give you an example. The Brazilian government has launched in January 2025 a national program for recovery of degraded pasture land. For you to have an idea, in Brazil, we have over 40 million hectares of degraded pasture land. We do classify degradation in 5 different levels, okay? But they are all different levels of degradation. We have more than 40 million hectares of degraded pasture land. As the government has launched this program in January, the first 2 to 3 years, they tend to improve the scenario of pasture degradation, but at the same time, 2026, they want to attach this program to the soil carbon revenue, to the soil carbon project, okay? So you see that instead of just looking at improving the soil, recovering the soil, and producing better forage, they have noticed, they have perceived that by doing so, they actually can sequester more carbon and create some carbon credits if they adopt the right methodology. And that's what's going to happen in Brazil in this specific program. Probably it's happening in other countries as well, okay? Other thing is provide technical support for baseline assessments and finance. The technical support in the case of institutional governmental programs, it's provided. The same case I have shared with you, the national program of degraded pasture land in Brazil, they provide for free technical support to farmers, and they are actually joining institutions with the government, with it's a public and private partnership with other businesses, other companies, so they are defining the baselines now, so they can have the baseline now of the amount of carbon they have, amount of microbiology, amount of life they have in the soil, so they can compare it in 3 or 5 years' time. Okay, so this is a very interesting thing to see in the near future. But here's a clear example that things are moving towards carbon certification. Okay, the benefit for farms, the benefit for farmers, diversified income. You have a different income coming from the carbon credits. You actually improve your production as well. Improved soil health, that's a part of a well-applied regenerative agriculture practice. You're going to be having a improved soil health that will benefit your both production and carbon. You have access, a farmer can have a possibility to access green finance if they demonstrate they are following up the procedures and etc. of voluntary carbon markets, and they can strengthen reputation and supply chain integration. I, as a buyer, I would probably, surely to say, prefer buying a dairy that's certified as a low carbon milk example. That's why it strengthens the reputation and supply chain integration. This is one of the examples. Broader impacts on rural landscapes. The carbon finance supports rural development, weather, water security, and biodiversity. It goes beyond, VCM goes beyond voluntary carbon markets itself. If you take a look, voluntary carbon markets must not just improve the carbon sequestration. They can go beyond by helping the water cycle, help biodiversity in itself. And that's why I have mentioned here on the broader impacts on rural landscapes, not just thinking about the farm itself, but looking at the rural landscape, something broader. Carbon finance supports rural development, which is a companion of good things, helps water security and biodiversity. So carbon markets are something very valuable. Nowadays, the majority of people, they tend to see voluntary carbon markets only as a way of creating credit that will be sold on the market. But at the end of the day, when you associate voluntary carbon markets with the right regenerative agriculture practice implementation, monitoring, reporting, verification, you have an improvement of water cycle, an improvement of biodiversity, and so on. And the result of it is the contribution of the Sustainable Development Goals 2, 13, and 15. Okay, beyond carbon, it goes beyond carbon. So the idea is that carbon markets are more than a way of producing carbon credits. I'm going to be sharing with you the last 2 questions. These are the reference I have used for this presentation, and I thank you. But before I go, I really want to thank you for the minutes you have spent watching me, and I really hope you have enjoyed the presentation. And I want to give you a very final message here on this third module. You as a professional can become a project developer, or maybe you can become a consultant working for a carbon developer, or you can be someone influencing your community that will actually make a difference at the end of the day. Carbon markets will be evolving soon for something bigger than carbon, something as biodiversity, water, culture thing. And this is very important for you to be switched on, to be very attentive, because a lot of opportunities will surge for people that want to work on the carbon markets, okay? Agronomists, veterinarians, zootechnists, animal health, biologists, environmental managers, lawyers, psychologists, any career can fit on that, because this market is a holistic market and we need a holistic team with a holistic point of view to make things happen, okay? Thank you very much again for your attention, and I really hope you have enjoyed this presentation. Bye. See you on the next fourth module.